5 people. 0 business still being alive. A mountain man left for dead on the American frontier. Crawled 200 miles on a broken leg. A flight attendant blown 6 miles out of a plane with no parachute. An engineer who stood at ground zero not once, but twice. A stewardess who kept boarding ships that kept sinking. And a physicist who put his head inside a particle accelerator and then finished his shift and went home. Every rule of physics, biology, and basic human survival says none of them should have made it. They all did. This is Historically Unwell. These are the top 5 people who flatly refused to die. Hugh Glass was a fur trapper on the American frontier in 1823, the kind of man who thought the South Dakota wilderness was perfectly manageable. He was wrong. While scouting ahead of his party, he walked around a bush and came face to face with a mother grizzly bear and her 2 cubs. That is the final boss of bear encounters. There is no worse version of this scenario. She tore open his back, bit through his throat, broke his leg, and partially ripped off his scalp. His companions killed the bear, looked at Hugh Glass on the ground, and made a completely reasonable assessment. This man is going to die. 2 volunteers agreed to stay behind, wait for him to pass, bury him, and rejoin the group. Instead, they took his rifle, his knife, and his supplies, dropped him in a shallow grave while he was still breathing, and left. He was 200 miles from the nearest outpost, alone, unarmed, with a broken leg, festering wounds, and maggots already moving into the infected tissue of his back. Reader, he was not dead. He woke up. He set his own broken leg. He wrapped himself in the bear hide they had placed over him as a burial shroud and started crawling, eating berries, roots, insects, and the picked-over remains of a wolf-killed buffalo calf. He deliberately kept the maggots in his wounds because he understood, somehow, that they were consuming the dead flesh that would otherwise kill him faster. He used maggots as surgery. 6 weeks later, he limped into Fort Kiowa, 200 miles, broken, unarmed, entirely alone. He forgave one of the men who abandoned him because the guy was just a teenager on his first expedition. The other had joined the army, which made killing him legally complicated. So Glass accepted a cash settlement and moved on. Hugh Glass did not die until 1833, 10 years later, in a fight with Arikara warriors. Honestly, the most on-brand ending possible. Vesna Vulovic was a 23-year-old flight attendant who was not even supposed to be on the flight. Her airline confused her with another stewardess who had the same first name. A clerical error, a paperwork mix-up. That mistake put her on JAT Flight 367 on January 26, 1972, heading from Copenhagen to Belgrade, flying at 33,000 feet. That is 6 miles above the Earth. A bomb hidden in the baggage compartment detonated. The aircraft broke into 3 pieces. Every person on board was killed instantly or blown out into air that was minus 40 degrees and barely breathable. Vesna survived because she happened to be in the tail section, pinned against her seat by a food cart during the blast. When the fuselage split apart, she was still strapped inside that chunk of wreckage. And that chunk fell. 6 miles. Straight down. It struck a snow-covered hillside in a wooded area. The trees and snow absorbed just enough of the impact to keep her alive. A local villager named Bruno Honke, a former World War II medic, found her still breathing and kept her alive until help arrived. Her injuries? Fractured skull, 3 broken vertebrae, both legs broken, broken ribs, fractured pelvis. She was in a coma for 27 days. When she woke up, she had no memory of the crash at all. Her first request was a cigarette. Doctors later discovered that the unusually low blood pressure, which had nearly disqualified her from being a flight attendant in the first place, had likely kept her heart from bursting on impact. The condition that almost ended her career saved her life. She went back to work for the airline. In 1985, Paul McCartney personally handed her a Guinness World Record certificate for the highest fall survived without a parachute. She looked at it and said, "I don't know what to say when people say I was lucky." Lucky is not quite the word. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a 29-year-old engineer from Nagasaki, wrapping up a 3-month business trip for Mitsubishi in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, his last day. He was walking toward the train station to finally go home when he realized he had forgotten something at the office. He turned around to get it. As he walked back, he saw a B-29 bomber overhead. He saw 2 small objects drop from the plane, attached to parachutes. Then the world went white. The atomic bomb Little Boy detonated approximately 2 miles away. The shockwave threw him into the air. The blast ruptured his eardrums, temporarily blinded him, and severely burned the left side of his body. He crawled to a shelter, survived the night, crossed a river filled with bodies the next morning, made it to the train station, and boarded a train to Nagasaki, his hometown. He arrived August 8th, received treatment for his burns, and somehow made it home. His injuries so severe that when he arrived at his own front door, his wife and family did not recognize him. On August 9th, despite being covered in bandages and barely functional, Tsutomu Yamaguchi went to work. He sat in a meeting with his supervisor and began describing what had happened in Hiroshima. The blinding flash, the entire city destroyed by a single bomb. His supervisor said that was impossible. At that exact moment, the sky outside the window went white. Fat Man detonated over Nagasaki. Yamaguchi was again approximately 2 miles from ground zero. He survived. Again. 2 atomic bombs, 3 days apart, different cities. He was there for both of them. He lived until 2010 at the age of 93 and spent the rest of his life as one of the world's most prominent advocates for nuclear disarmament, addressing the United Nations, writing poetry, speaking publicly until he was no longer able to. He said, "Having experienced atomic bombings twice and survived, it is my destiny to talk about it." There is nothing to add to that sentence. Violet Jessup was a stewardess for the White Star Line in the early 1900s. In 1911, she was aboard the RMS Olympic, the largest ship in the world at the time, when it collided with a British warship called HMS Hawke, tearing the hull open. The ship survived. Violet was fine. Her colleagues then convinced her to transfer to the Olympic's brand new sister ship for what they promised would be a wonderful experience. That ship was the Titanic. April 14th, 1912. You know what happens. Iceberg. Over 1,500 people dead. Violet boarded Lifeboat 16 with a stranger's baby pressed into her arms by a ship's officer. She held that baby all night. The next morning, rescued by the Carpathia, she was sitting on deck when a woman rushed over, grabbed the child without a single word, and ran off. No thank you, no conversation. Violet went back to work. Because she needed the money, loved the sea, and apparently had no survival instinct when it came to choosing employment. 4 years later, working as a nurse in World War I, she signed on with the HMHS Britannic, the third and final ship in the Olympic class. On November 21, 1916, the Britannic struck a German mine in the Aegean Sea and sank in under an hour. Violet made it to a lifeboat. The lifeboat was pulled toward the ship's still spinning propellers. She watched other lifeboats get dragged in and destroyed, the water turning red around the stern. She jumped overboard. She was sucked under the keel. The hull struck her in the head. She survived. She was pulled out of the water. Years later, a doctor told her she had at some point fractured her skull. She knew exactly which time. 3 maritime disasters, 3 actual ships, all of them White Star Line's most famous vessels, all of them while Violet was on board. Violet Jessup retired from sea work at 63 after a 42-year career and lived until 1971 at the age of 83. They called her Miss Unsinkable. She earned it. Okay, I need you to understand that nothing else on this list, not the grizzly bear, not the 6-mile fall, not the 2 atomic bombs, nothing prepared you for this. Anatoly Bugorsky was a 36-year-old particle physicist at the Institute for High Energy Physics in Protvino, Soviet Union, working on the U-70 synchrotron, the largest particle accelerator in the USSR, on July 13, 1978. A piece of equipment had malfunctioned. Routine troubleshooting. Bugorsky leaned in to take a look. What he did not know was that the safety mechanisms had been switched off during earlier experiments, and nobody had switched them back on. The proton beam was active. He put his head directly into the path of a beam of protons traveling at 99.99% the speed of light. The beam entered through the back of his skull, passed through his occipital lobe, temporal lobe, and left ear, and exited through his nose. He described it as a flash brighter than 1,000 suns. He felt no pain. The beam moves faster than nerve signals, so his body could not register the damage in real time. He finished his shift. He went home. He did not go to the hospital until the following morning, at which point the left side of his face had swollen beyond recognition, and his skin had begun peeling away, tracing the exact path the beam had burned through his skull. He had received approximately 300,000 rads of radiation. The dose that kills a human being is around 500 rads. He absorbed 600 times a fatal dose, directly to the brain. Doctors admitted him to observe what they assumed would be his death. Nobody had ever survived this. There was no treatment protocol. They were just watching. He didn't die. His left side became paralyzed, he lost hearing in his left ear, replaced by permanent ringing, and he developed epilepsy. But his intelligence remained completely untouched. He completed his PhD. He returned to work at the same institute on the same particle accelerator. Decades later, the right side of his face, the side in the path of the beam, had aged visibly differently than the left. A particle accelerator went through his head and gave him the world's most unhinged anti-aging treatment. His case changed safety protocols for particle accelerators worldwide. He is the only known human data point for a direct proton beam to the skull. He applied for disability status. He was rejected. He once told Wired magazine, "I am being tested. The human capacity for survival is being tested." As of this video, he is still alive. So there you have it. A mountain man who crawled 200 miles on a broken leg after being mauled, abandoned, and left in a grave. A flight attendant who fell 6 miles with no parachute and woke up asking for a cigarette. An engineer who caught both atomic bombs and made it home both times. A stewardess who survived the Titanic, the Britannic, and somehow kept showing up for work. And a physicist who took a proton beam through the skull, finished his shift, earned his doctorate, and is still out there. The human body is not supposed to survive any of this. Which of these 5 had the absolute lowest odds of survival? Hugh Glass crawling 200 miles on a broken leg? Vesna Vulovic falling 6 miles with no parachute? Yamaguchi catching both bombs? Violet Jessup surviving 3 ships? Or Bugorsky taking a proton beam to the skull and going home? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Subscribe to Historically Unwell for new stories every week. If this one broke your brain even slightly, like the video. It helps more than you think. Stay unwell.